What's up, you guys? So what we're going to do here is we're going to do the usual ToDo App, but I promise this will be worth your while. What we'll leverage in this technology is we're going to be doing NextJS 14. We'll tie it in with Firebase. Specifically, we'll leverage the Firebase Authentication, Firebase hosting, and definitely the database. And we'll use Firestore for that. A couple things, we will slowly build this out. We'll start by creating a UI and making sure our app is working locally. And once we get that done, what we'll do is we'll progress it into implementing Firebase with authentication. And then once authentication is working, we'll then implement the database itself. The one thing that is powerful about Firebase is that you can get everything done on the client side. You can do your update, you can do your adding, you can do all those things, deleting of data from the database by just running it on the client side. So we'll start with the client side, but there are many of us that we prefer using the server side when it comes to those kinds of actions. So what we'll do is we'll make it happen first on the client side, and then we'll transition all of that code onto the server side, which Next.js does a really good job providing. We'll talk about different features, but again, we'll start locally first, building the app, and then we'll go from there. And hopefully you do end up finding this worthwhile. So let's get coding. All right, so the first thing that we'll do is let's set up our app by going, I'm already in my directory here to get started. So I'm gonna go ahead and run npm create next app at latest. So we're leveraging it, and we'll call this ToDo Firebase. Let's let it run. We're gonna use TypeScript, we'll use ESLint, definitely Tailwind, not the source directory, app router, because we want to make sure we showcase that, not in the import alias, and let it run. All right, so we need to go to the actual folder to make it run. So we're going to go to CD, okay, and then we're going to install all of the dependencies for it. All right, so now that all of our dependencies are installed, we're actually going to install one more thing because we're going to see this later, so might as well pre-install it. npm install Firebase, let's do that. We won't see this until a little bit later, but might as well have it done now. All right, so now that we have all the dependencies for Next.js installed, we have Firebase installed, let's go ahead and start putting together our UI. So I'm gonna go ahead and run npm run div so we can look at it. All right, as you can see, our app is running. Let's do a couple things. Let's go ahead. I do have pre-written code that I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste so that we're saving some time here. So the first thing, let's go ahead and modify the home page. There it is. I don't think I need this to be that big, so let's go ahead and lower it down. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this, which also means I'm going to get rid of this. All right, so we are going to go ahead and paste this in there. And we're also going to use next navigation. Let's go ahead and add that on. And let's click save, see the update. There it is. I'm also going to get rid of our global CSS for now. Let's do that. So keep it simple. There it is. We have a get started. All right, so if you notice that the next link has it set up so that it is routed to a route ToDo/ToDo-app. We don't have that right now. If we try to click this button, let's see, we're gonna run into an issue because that page currently doesn't exist. So that's gonna be the next thing that we'll configure. So let's get going. All right, so to create that route, all we have to do, and again, this is different from Pages. We're now using App Router, and the convention is you create a folder and you name the folder the route you want it to be. So we're going to do this ToDo App, and then there are two ways to do this, but I'm just going to show you how this works. First, we're going to use a page.tsx. What ends up happening is if you use page.tsx, it is the default component that will be rendered. So let's go ahead and code go in here. And we're going to call this ToDo App component. I'm going to go ahead and click save. So that is it. We've just created our route that will now render based on the click for getting started. So let's go ahead and do that. As you can see, it's now rendering the app component that we want to render when we go to the route. all right, to-do app route. But what we want is we want to be able to check whether a user is authenticated or not. There are many ways to do this. You could, of course, conditionally render things within this component, but NextJS actually is a really neat component called layout component, which is like a parent component that supersedes the page.tsx that we can leverage. So let's go ahead and showcase that so you understand what I'm talking about. If I click on create a new file, layout.tsx. Okay, so we're gonna call this to-do app layout component. Okay, let's go ahead and save it. Well, you'll see, so right now this is currently rendering the to-do app component. If I save this, what you will see, give it a second to pull that information. Now you'll see that it is now rendering the to-do app layout component, right? So now what we can do is we can do our conditional rendering based on whether a user is authenticated or not. So let's go ahead and manually do that. It is authenticated. Let's just say false. Okay, we're gonna make this into a one line. All right, and we're gonna say if they're authenticated, if it is authenticated, we're gonna render that component. If they're not, then let's render sign in for now, since we don't have a component for signing in yet. So let's go ahead and save that. They're not authenticated. It should say sign in, as you can see right here. They have to sign in because they're not authenticated. If they are authenticated, so true, it should render the other component, which is our pages.tsx, which is, oh, actually, I'm sorry. It's rendering our current layout component. What we want to actually render is this page.tsx, which is the app itself. So layout component takes in children, which by default page.tsx is the child. So if we go children, let's make sure we don't get yelled at by TypeScript here. Okay, and if we get rid of this and say children, okay, so right now it's rendering layout component, but if we go ahead and save that, what you'll notice is that it will now render our to-do app component. So what we have so far is actually pretty good. We have something that renders one or the other based on whether a user is authenticated or not. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to create our sign-in component, make sure we're taking in email address and password and being able to log in or sign up. So that'll be our next step. All right, so we're going to add in our sign-in component. There are two approaches to this. One is, I think, the more flexible way where you create a component for sign-in that can be used everywhere else. But if your app is only going to be rendering one page, then there's something called parallel routes. I'll show you that here in just a second. But for now, why don't we create our sign-in component. Let's go here. Okay. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and put in our code. Okay, so now that we have our sign-in component created, let's go ahead and import that. There, and then now what we can do is we can just use that. Oops. All right, so I have the sign-in component. All right, so now it is no longer mad at me because I put use client for my sign-in component. Since we are using use state, there are other ways around this, but for now, this is what we're gonna do. And then, as you can see here, right now we have this to true, but if we say false, it should now render our sign-in component. All right, so that works. That's pretty cool. All right, so the thing is, another way to do this, like I said, is that if you have only one place to sign in and there's only one page to render, like only the ToDo App page, then the other way that you can do is something called parallel routing. So the way it works is in the same route ToDo App, what you can do is you can create a folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a folder here. And the naming convention starts with an @ and then whatever the name of the route is, right? So I'm going to just call it sign in, right? So in here, you're going to create a file called page.tsx. And from there, all we'll do is let's just go ahead and copy all of the code from sign in. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then in layout, what you can do is, so instead of this sign in component that I have here, like I said, when you use the layout component, it acts as a parent. So there are other children. So the parallel route child that you created is called sign in. And over here, we're going to do the same thing. Let's just copy this. And we'll call this sign in. Just to make this look a little cleaner, let's put that in another line. Okay, so now I have the sign in parallel route, and what I can do is put sign in instead, just so, and then I no longer need this imported sign in. But if I press save, so as you can see, now the same sign in component is rendered, but now as a child component from parallel routing and not as the other component. But for this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and keep the other component, because what if this app grows and there are other features that it's going to have and we need to reuse this same sign in component? We don't want to keep moving components around. All right, so it should still render the same thing. We're good to go. All right, so we have our landing page. We have a route that gets us to the ToDo App that determines whether you're logged in or not. If you're logged in, it gets you into the app, which is the child. We have our sign in component that handles if they're not signed in. So let's go ahead and make this so that it says we are authenticated. And with this, I think what we need to do before we start tying into Firebase Authentication, and let's set up our UI for adding a ToDo component. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that quick. Over here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have another folder, components that has to do with the ToDo App. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and create a file, tsx. Add ToDo component. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna return a form. Okay, so now our ToDo component is ready to go. Let's go ahead and import that. All right, so we have an add to do. I mean, we could do something with this UI, but we'll just leave it at that for now. We need to put a handler on this, right? So what we want to do, what I did is we have our UI, we have our input, we have our button. We need to make sure that it is type submit. Okay, and then the other thing that we're missing right now, on submit handler, which is the handle submit. Oops. Clean that up a little bit. All right, so we have everything wired up, it seems like. So if I were to type in here, world, good. So it looks good. We have it consoling over here, which means our form is working. And our next step is we need to create our component that will render our to-dos as we add them, right? So first what we'll need to do is const to do set to-dos. And then we'll just say any like this. Okay, so we'll leave it at that for now. So as we add a to-do, we want to add it in our to-do state. And then for now at least, we will pass it on to another component that will list it right at the bottom, right? So that's our goal here. So let's do that. So every time a to-do is being created, let's create an object. To-do is going to be to-do. Timestamp. We can just put a timestamp in here. Oops. And then we'll initialize that to not being completed. The form should be ready to go because we now have set to do when a to do is added. We also have it reset so we can continue adding on as we go through. The input is required so we're not accidentally adding empty strings into our to-dos. So let's go ahead and try this. Grocery, good. So you can see down here it's getting added. Workout, there it is. It's working. Awesome. So let's go ahead and add that on into our UI so we can see it. All right, so let's map it. What we want is, for now, we'll use index as our key, which is absolutely terrible practice, so please don't do that in production. Let's put a key, again, index. That's not something you want to do. What we'll end up doing is we'll use the ID of the to-do from the database as key later on. But for now, let's go ahead and render. As you can see, grocery workout is now rendering for us. That's great. Pick up food, feed dog, go for a walk. Everything is working. That's awesome. So we'll keep it simple. Go ahead and get rid of this console because we know that it's working. And it looks like we are set to go. So what we're going to do now is we need to set up authentication with Firebase. So this is going to be the next big step, which will take a little bit of time. But as soon as we get that going, we'll get authentication going, we'll get Firestore going, and then we'll be good to go.